attackers have gotten very good at stealing a password.
We have a lot of AI washing that's going on in this space.
AI is simultaneously the most overhyped and underhyped capability. If we can put this intelligence into the fabric of the network, we could do amazing things.
You are listening to the AI with Maribel Lopez podcast, or AI with ML. If this is your first time listening, thank you for joining. The AI with Maribel Lopez podcast is brought to you by the Data for Betterment Foundation. This podcast shares the stories of the people behind the new world of data and AI. What are they creating, and why does it matter? If you like this episode, please subscribe so you can easily find the podcast again. You can find the video version of this podcast at youtube.com at AI with Maribel Lopez. You can also share your feedback and ideas with me on X, also known as Twitter, and LinkedIn. All links are in the show notes. Extended show notes, episodes, and transcripts can be found at lopezresearch.com/podcast. I hope you'll enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Maribel Lopez. And over the past 6 months, many companies have contacted Lopez Research to ask questions about AI and security. And as a result, Lopez Research and the Data for Betterment Foundation are looking for ways to educate the market on the impact and changes in security. So to gain more insight on this space, I've invited an expert to share some of his insights on how the landscape is evolving and how their company's products are evolving. And I'm really excited to be joined here today with Tom Gillis, who is the Senior Vice President and General Manager of the Cisco Security Business Group. Hey, Tom, welcome to the program.
Hi, Maribel. Thank you for having me.
So I've actually followed you for quite some years now. It's actually pretty exciting to get to talk to you on a one-on-one basis. And I've also followed Cisco for more years than I'd care to mention at the moment. But what I've seen from my side is that Cisco's always been very focused on security and making sure that security was part of its product portfolio. But I've also noticed that recently the company has taken a broader approach to security. And one of the things that we were talking about at Cisco Live was the Cisco Security Cloud. So I was wondering if you could spend a few minutes telling us what the Cisco Security Cloud is and sort of how that concept came about.
Yeah, sure thing. So the Cisco Security Cloud is Cisco's security platform. And let me explain what a platform is. And if you have been following my background, Maribel, you might remember I was part of the founding team of a company called Ironport. Ironport was a spam filter, and it was arguably best in class, right? So there was, 30, 40 other companies that made spam filters. You'd argue ours was the best. We were acquired by Cisco back in 2007. And after that acquisition, I took over and ran all the security portfolio back then. So it has the experience with Cisco. Back in those days, the philosophy that a customer had was, let's find the best possible technology we can to solve each individual problem and deploy them. And so what would happen is new problem evolves into security, a whole cluster of new companies springs up to solve that problem. And I want to be clear, I was part of that ecosystem. Those startup point solutions can be quite excellent in their own domain. The challenge was after 20, 30 years of this, customers are deploying product after product after product after product. I meet customers that have 200 security products in their environment, and yet are they more or less prepared against attacks like ransomware? So the whole industry has realized, hey, this isn't working, and we have to look at a different approach, which is a platform. And a platform is defined as a system of systems. So think lots of individual components that work together to solve the security problem more effectively than you can get with the individual point solutions. And that's a really, really important point. A security platform is not about taking mediocre products and selling them at a discount. That would be like me trying to sell you a mediocre pacemaker, or mediocre. This car has got mediocre anti-lock brakes, but yeah, don't worry. If there's a problem, we'll send a technician to your house the next day. What?
You'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly. Don't worry. So the fundamentals have to be excellent. And so this is really something we've been focusing on at Cisco. If you look at the fundamentals of a product like our firewall, we have dramatically improved quality, lead time, price performance. So the kind of core aspects to what makes a product successful have to be in place. But that's not enough these days, where what customers are looking for is show me how this individual product is part of this larger system that can help us identify threats more accurately by looking across email and web and the endpoint and the network and identifying things that don't look right. So the Cisco Security Cloud is the control plane that ties all this stuff together. It's the thing the customer touches to deploy a solution that can span all the way from the endpoint all the way through the various pieces of the network infrastructure. And we're really excited about it.
I love where you've gone with this because I think it really speaks to the fundamental need that organizations have been suffering through and have had for some time. We've always talked about how many security widgets were enough. You mentioned some of the clients have 200 products. I think in average, the stat that gets thrown around is every company seems to have at least 80 security products, which when you think of it, it's like duct tape and sticky glue, right? It's like, put them all together. They all have different cadence of how they evolve, right?
They all have their own training program. They all have a user conference, right? So the issue is not that these solutions aren't good. I'll say that again. They are good. The issue is that the customer struggles. They don't have the staff to operationalize all this stuff. These things aren't free in terms of how you deploy them. And that's really where this platform movement was born. And the idea of platforms is not radically new, Maribel. As long as I've been in this industry, there's been a talk of like, oh, when is the industry going to consolidate? It's just that it's finally here, and that these platform vendors like Cisco can demonstrate a better security outcome when these pieces are tied together.
But I do think it speaks to when you think from a customer standpoint, when they want to try to buy something, it's not necessarily that they want to buy every piece of something from one vendor, but they want things to be more integrated so that they have an easier time deploying those solutions. And then also the other thing we've spoken with clients about is this concept of they can't come in all day and just review new products, right? Because there's always a new security product that's coming from a different vendor, which requires all that onboarding and education that you mentioned. So that's not scalable for even the largest companies. I spoke to one company and he said, I have 500 security companies that have knocked on my door and I don't even have enough time to evaluate them all. So there's that.
Just to meet with them. I was part of that world, right? And so I do think my friends that are starting companies now are finding a much more challenging just to get traction with a large enterprise customer because of this dynamic. Now, I said this sort of jokingly, but I think it's important to understand the customer is not going to pick one security platform, especially the large enterprise customer. And so our worldview is that we want to focus on things that Cisco can do uniquely well. And that is where security meets the network. So when that laptop connects to the network, this is where we shine, right? And we're putting special security telemetry and hooks into that intersection point. And our worldview is that if you think about other security platforms that the customer may have, Microsoft, in the eyes of the customer, Cisco and Microsoft are oftentimes the pillars of their IT strategy, or certainly among the pillars. And so we've been working hard with Microsoft to make sure the things that we build are additive to Microsoft. Yes, there might be places where we overlap and would compete, but for the most part, it's highly additive in that they have deep expertise in the Windows operating system, deep expertise in Office 365 and those applications, and where we sit where everything between that operating system and the application, and can pull these together in a smooth and cohesive way. So that's been going pretty well. It helps simplify things for our customers when they're like, good, Cisco and Microsoft, please work nicely together. And together we can add value. Yeah.
I think the other big transition that when you were talking about moving to the security cloud and you talked about the various areas where security could be, there used to be this moat concept that we tried to build a moat around the organization. And we know that we sort of threw out the moat a bit ago. But having said that, we're now moving into this highly distributed, your applications are distributed, your people are distributed. There are different types of devices that might even need physical security as well as network-based security. So it's quite the confusing landscape for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But I was wondering from where you stand, given that whole big distributed landscape,
Yeah.
what kind of advice are you giving organizations to deal with this distributed nature that we're looking at from a security standpoint?
One has to embrace the distributed nature of security. It actually allows us to deliver a much better security outcome. Now,
Okay.
it can be difficult if you think about the old security models. The one you articulated, it was a moat, it was a fence, right? And you would set this perimeter up and you would put a bunch of appliances in the perimeter, firewalls, IPSs, web proxies, and you're like, all right, everything behind this is safe and good and trusted, and everything outside of this moat is dirty and untrusted and scary. And so right, that model has clearly broken, but some of the mentality is still there. And so at Cisco, our view is that we are building distributed security in a way that leverage the network, right? When you're going to think about, instead of having one or five places where you insert security, you're going to have 500,000 or a million places you insert security. It's got to be woven into the fabric of the network. You can't be managing security the way we used to do it before. So there's two ways that this really manifests itself. One is, as we think about distributing security, we want to put security close to the user, wherever the user may be. Cisco is not the only one that does this. We have folks like Zscaler and Palo Alto and Netscope also do this, but it's what the industry calls SSE, Secure Services Edge. It's like our term, right? And it's taking those services that used to live in the DMZ, in the perimeter, and breaking them up into pieces and putting them close to the user. And that might mean several hundred points of presence around the world. You want to be within 20 milliseconds of a user, and certainly less than 1,000 points of presence. You're going to cover the globe in terms of connectivity, which is interesting. But what we're doing that I think is groundbreaking, and frankly, the reason I came to Cisco is the other end of the wire, which is, all right, we want to distribute security, not to the, as I said, SSC is putting security close to the user, but what about the other end, which is put it close to the application? And here, you want to break it not into hundreds of pieces, but actually into tens of thousands of pieces, because applications are very complex and they have lots of little tiny components that make them up, especially a VM-based application, a traditional app. The industry would talk about a 3-tier web app where there's a web tier, an app tier, and a database. As we move into a modern Kubernetes application, it's not 3 tiers. It could be 3,000 tiers. All these little tiny microservices that turn on and turn off. You really need to understand every single one of them and what it's talking to be able to properly do security. And this is very exciting because we're uniquely able to do this. So we announced a product that we call Cisco Hypershield, which is a distributed security architecture for applications, whether they're living in the public cloud, so on Amazon or Google and Microsoft, or in your private cloud, whether they're Kubernetes-based or VM-based, but we can take that fence and turn it into a fabric, right? So we can literally deploy tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of enforcement points, and they can live in software, in an operating system. They can live in a certain class of hardware called a DPU, data processing unit. These are chips that are made by Intel, NVIDIA, and AMD. And so we can put those chips in servers. So it's a little security enforcement point in a server complex. But the really interesting form factor is we're putting those types of chips into network devices themselves. And so now the line between what is a network device and what is a security device, that line is being very, very blurred. And so that's going to allow us to deploy this fabric that could be made up of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of little tiny enforcement points. And so, of course, you need a management program that can manage hundreds of thousands or a million enforcement points without writing rules for each one, right? That's not going to scale. And this is again what we've been focusing on with Hypershield. So distributed security for the data center, high levels of automation, one enforcement point, the security cloud, one policy creation point, and many, many, many enforcement points.
I love this when we're talking about policy, like how do we do policy and the move to be more automated and not as I have to delineate everything, because back on the discussion of people and back on the discussions of threats, it's just not scalable. Now, another thing people have been talking a lot about, of course, is breach protection. So, can you give us some insight on your thoughts around breach protection and how does that tie into the recent acquisition of Splunk and those sorts of things?
Yeah, sure thing. So this is an area we've been very focused on. Cisco has very unique telemetry, and this might seem obvious, but it's worth stating out loud, is that we see every single connection coming off a laptop and connecting to a server, but then all the connections behind that server. You click on a button on a website, that could spawn 100 connections internally, right? We see every single one of those connections, and we see them in very fine-grained detail. We can see which software process initiated the connection and which one terminated it. Now, that is a tremendous amount of data. That's like, we estimate 100 to 1,000 times more data than gets ingested in a typical SIM or analytics platform today. But it's that level of granularity that's necessary to identify these more modern attacks, where attackers have gotten very good at stealing a password, a credential.
Yes.
Right?
So good.
It's so good, right? Because what they're preying on is humans are basically good and trusting, and they get an email from someone that looks pretty legitimate, and it's like, oh, hey, would you check on this? In the days of those really goofy emails with the spelling mistakes that were obviously not, oh, dear sir or madam, I'm a prince in a foreign country, I need to borrow your bank account. My dad still falls for that, right? Like, he's still, oh, that guy's so friendly, right? Oh, gee, but for most of us, we're way beyond that. But these emails are so targeted that it's hard to tell friend from foe. And so people are clicking on stuff. So bad guys have a password. We make that assumption. So now we need to look very, very carefully at that, what we call lateral movement, right? The movement throughout the infrastructure. Lateral movement, by definition, happens on the network. And so at Cisco, we have this incredible treasure trove of data. It's like we're sitting on a giant oil reserve, or imagine like a gold vein in the earth, but you don't know how to extract that. And so this is the work that we've been doing, is how do we extract this data in a way that doesn't just blow up your security telemetry? And so we started on this journey with a more modest offering that we call Cisco XDR. And that's been very, very successful. We, in the first 12 months, we've had hundreds of customers getting on this platform. And it looks at that unique telemetry, that process level telemetry that maybe isn't even available in log data. And so as we're bringing Splunk and Cisco together, the integration of Cisco XDR into Splunk is one of the first and most obvious things that we're doing. And so making that a smooth continuum from this really cool, I'll say focused, kind of narrowly focused, but very deep security analytics engine, the Cisco XDR, we send those verdicts and signals up into Splunk, and now we're able to identify lateral movement without having to ingest this massive quantity of data. So using data and telemetry that exists in Cisco infrastructure and finding ways to efficiently feed that in to Splunk to figure out friend from foe, that to me is the big deal. That is a much harder problem to solve than I just made it sound. It's a multi-year journey that we're on. But we're already taking the first steps on that journey. You can see Cisco XDR feeding those alerts and that information into Splunk SIM.
I think one of the things that's been pervasive over time is the goal has always been fairly similar, but how we approach the goal in terms of the cost, the accuracy, the speed of what we can do and how we can do it has changed tremendously over time with technology. So I'm really excited about the trajectory that
right on the money. You're right on the money. So if you were listening carefully in my narrative, some of the things I've talked about of doing distributed analytics and understanding east-west traffic movement, these are not new ideas. The industry has been working on these things because done right, they're very, very powerful. The thing that is net new, there are 3 building blocks that we have at our disposal. The whole community, our competitors have this too, but 3 building blocks that Cisco's been focusing on that are going to make these solutions, I believe, transformative. The first is these advanced forms of silicon. So we talked about, so the DPUs, the GPUs, we can put them together and installing them in a distributed array where a network device now has security processing that can read and understand content, 1,000 times faster than was anything that was able to have been done before. That's breakthrough. The second, and this is a technical detail, and I apologize, but it's in the operating system itself. There's a capability called Extended Berkeley Packet Filter, eBPF. It's not a snappy name, but it's a really, really, really big deal. eBPF, and it's a standards-based interface. It's very mature in Linux, and we're rapidly bringing it to Windows operating systems. It allows a security process that's running in what we call user space, which is like kind of the safe, normal area that an app runs. It allows that to look into the heart of the operating system, called the kernel, without actually being in the kernel. And if you remember the recent, I won't name names, but one of the security vendors had a bad update, and it took down
Use the kernel.
In the kernel. You know what I'm talking about. And the reason I don't like to throw rocks is like it could have happened to any one of us, right? But because security needs to move at this tempo like this, it's constantly updating. But when it's resident in the kernel, if you have a bad update, it takes the machine down. And that's what took down. There was a massive outage that, sort of everybody, you couldn't miss it, right? It touched everybody. eBPF in Linux and now in Windows isolates those two things. So the security stuff can update very, very rapidly. The kernel keeps running. So if the security goes kerflooey, the kernel's like, hey, security agent, I haven't heard from you for a while. And it's like, oh, I'm rebooting. And it reboots, but the world goes marching merrily on. We have that same concept in networking devices. So as we start to put security enforcement, like those DPUs we talked about earlier, and GPUs in a networking device, they are what we call tightly integrated but loosely coupled, which means they're independent of the network processing. So that if security gets bogged down, goes kerflooey for whatever reason, the packets keep moving, right? The packets keep getting forwarded to where they're going. And so they're really very different types of silicon that we bring together into this sort of combined architecture. It's one device, it's one box, it's one the security cloud, and the networking cloud is the management console for this thing. But the mechanisms underneath it are very, very different. And I believe that what we just described, that is the future of security, because you can't control the endpoint these days, right? Like in iPhones and this and that. So if we can put this intelligence into the fabric of the network, we could do amazing things. We're starting in the data center, but we're not limited to the data center, right? Think about a factory floor. Think about a hospital environment. If you have security processing in the fabric of the network, that all of a sudden opens possibilities that simply weren't available just a few years ago. So these building blocks are really important.
So you mentioned a couple of things, and some of them, when people think of GPUs, they think a lot of AI. Those two things have become synonymous at some point.
Yeah.
I'm actually happy that you didn't spend a lot of time throwing around the word AI, because I think at this point we have a lot of AI washing that's going on in this space. But I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, what's your take on AI and how it impacts security?
Yeah, it's transformative. And I always say AI is simultaneously the most overhyped and underhyped capability. So the way we think about it is, it's relatively easy to take AI, large language models, and put them on top of an existing product and make a nice kind of natural language interface and just something like a firewall. That's something that we've done. It's what our competitors are doing. Like that, we see that all around. And to me, like, that's table stakes. That's good. It's important. It makes things better. But where it gets transformative is we talk about AI native products, meaning AI products that we're building, like Hypershield, that we would not have been able to build without AI sort of integrated into the product itself. And I'll give you an example. It's a little bit techy, but it's worth, bear with me here. So when we think about going through a network security upgrade, that can be a difficult thing for a customer to do. Network security devices are high performance, inline, highly engineered devices. And so they get upgraded relatively infrequently, right? And you have to have a change control window. You got to take the device offline. It could take all day to do the upgrade. And it can be dangerous or scary because you've got to get that thing back online and running because it's in the heartbeat of your business, right? So imagine where with Hypershield, instead of running one of these little network security widgets, we actually run two. In every one of the million enforcement points we talk about, we run a digital twin. So we have a primary data path and a shadow data path. And they're running right next to each other. And it's the full packet processing pipeline. And there's a little tiny AI engine that compares those two. So if we're running version 2.0 of the Hypershield code, when 2.1 becomes available, we load that into what we call the shadow data path, not in a sample of the traffic, everywhere in this distributed array, right? So if you're a bank, your entire bank becomes a digital twin, and we run the new code and we process all the packets, and the AI engine says, look, I've looked at memory, latency, jitter, packet formulation. These things look the same. And so we cluster between those data paths, and then without opening a ticket or dropping a packet, we move traffic onto 2.1. We run that for 5 days. The AI engine says, hey, these are still the same. We load 2.2. So this is security infrastructure that upgrades itself. And when I show that to a firewall administrator, they're like, when can I have that? It's a transformative capability. We couldn't have done this without AI. And so it was truly AI native, meaning like this product was born with AI built into the management model. And that's how we manage 1 million of these things in an enterprise. There's no way you could manage 1 million tiny network enforcement points the old way. You have to have this new, highly automated way. And so that's an example of how I think AI is fundamentally transforming the tools and the techniques and the way we operationalize products and security in ways that 2 years ago weren't even possible.
I'm really excited about the scale at which AI allows us to do things, which is exactly what you were just talking about.
Yeah.
Things that couldn't be done before that we
Yeah.
can now do that will make things better. Now, I know
Yeah.
you talked a lot. We've covered a lot of ground, right?
Yeah.
We've covered what's happening in AI. We've covered some of the changes in the security landscape. We started a bit with the future of what's going to happen in security, but maybe we could close out with what you think's next for Cisco and security.
Yeah. So we've covered, as you said, a lot of ground. I think if you're following this carefully, what we're doing with zero trust access and secure access is very, very competitive. And I think, just to be candid, Cisco security, we were on our heels in a defensive position for a while, right? But we've come off our heels, we're on our toes, we're winning deals, we're taking market share. That's the goal, right? Not just to hold our own, but to build products that are really, really unique and leverage the network in ways that our competitors simply cannot. And so secure access and zero trust is here and now. What we're doing in the data center with Hypershield and putting security into the fabric of the network, switches and routers, that is emerging, but really, really powerful. Bringing Splunk to tie all that together. And then the next wave is going to be, I think, have 2 prongs. It's going to be very AI centric, but it's using AI to make sure that network outages due to misconfiguration or misunderstanding of a configuration, I think we can drive those to zero. And that's a really, really big deal. If you pay careful attention to Cisco equipment, the hardware that we make at this point, and in fairness, our competitors are in a similar state, the ASICs almost never fail. You know what I mean? It's like it's a very rare occurrence. We're like, oh, look at that, the hardware just blew up, right? I talked to customers that had a flood in their data center, 3 inches of water, and their catalyst switches are still running, right? So like the hardware is ultra reliable. At this point in the industry, Gartner will tell you, the vast majority of network outages, which is the thing we care about as networking professionals, is uptime. It's due to either misconfiguration or misunderstanding of the configuration. And our ability to see from that endpoint all the way through to that server, and when you go to make a policy change, to test that using synthetic traffic generation, that is transformative. And so I believe that we can take the 75, 80% of network outages due to misconfiguration, we can make it approach zero. Won't hit zero, but it can get damn close. So I call it zero trust and zero downtime network access, right? Like, this thing just works. And so highly automated policy formulation, take the human out of the loop to like no mistakes. You can validate every change you make before you make it. That's going to have a major operational efficiency gain for our customers. And then the kind of in parallel to that, we're working on much deeper AI-based security that can protect AI-based applications. As the whole world is is, sort of proliferating these AI-based apps using LLMs and acceleration from things like GPUs to actually observe the behavior of an application and say, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't look right to us. I think that's going to be another rich area. So those are both actively being worked on, and stay tuned for some exciting announcements in that domain.
Well, I'm excited to hear what you build next and to see it launched. Tom, thank you so much for your time, your attention, and for keeping us and everyone in the world safer. Thank you for listening. Additional content can be found at lopezresearch.com/podcasts. Until next time, wishing you all the best.